and he's like banging on the door like, Viceroy, I know you fucked up. Get out of here. And
Viceroy, your pizza's
Hako's
here.
like literally starting to try to run off, and Gunray's like, Hako, where are you going? Running is only gonna make us look guilty.
We are guilty.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube. This is King Orange here, back again for another podcast. And with me today, I got my good friend Deadponic.
Hello.
And today we're doing a special coverage. In light of the Revenge of the Sith re-release that's about to start up tomorrow at the time of this recording, we will be pretty much, our way of celebrating that is covering the direct prequel novel to Revenge of the Sith, Labyrinth of Evil. This existed back in the old continuity. It was written by James Luceno, and it released in January of 2005. And so, we got a lot to talk about for this one.
We have a lot to talk about here. This is the, you could say this is the prequel to the prequel, but this basically covers, as we talked about in our part 2 of our micro series, this is the other side of the whole where Obi-Wan and Anakin were during the Battle of Coruscant and how they actually managed to catch up. And wasn't it in this novel specifically that they explained that Grievous laid out hyperminds of some kind?
Yes, but we'll get to that soon. We got a lot to talk about, but yeah, beginning with background information, as mentioned, came out in this was written by James Luceno, who's become a pretty, at the time this was during his earlier career, but he was still pretty big as far as expanded universe writing goes. I think before Labyrinth of Evil, I'm pretty sure he wrote Cloak of Deception, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, he did.
So, if I'm not mistaken, not unless I missed one, I think this is either his second or third book within the expanded
Who wrote Dark Rendezvous?
No, that was a different author.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but James Luceno directly wrote this. This was pretty much took drafts from the early Revenge of the Sith script to essentially get everything lined up with that, and then just kind of worked from there. On top of that, Labyrinth of Evil is also the first part of the official Dark Lord trilogy. So, pretty much, the Dark Lord trilogy as a set of books was pretty much meant to cover the events surrounding Revenge of the Sith, both right before, during, and right after. And so, Labyrinth of Evil is pretty much the first part of it, which operates as taking place within, like, the final month before Revenge of the Sith starts.
It's also worth... Let's quickly talk about the cover, because the cover is kind of interesting, because on the front you have Grievous and Anakin, which are the two mainline characters of this book, if I'm not mistaken. And then on the back...
you have Obi-Wan in the back, which is... Right.
Funny enough, this book... Well, that's the B plot, actually. The A plot is centered around taking into consideration something from Attack of the Clones, where they're trying to investigate who Darth Sidious is and, everything surrounding that.
Yeah, pretty much the biggest thing I can already say right away in regards with this book is I've kind of mentioned several times my stance on how the prequel trilogy, in a way, is kind of one movie too short. And the biggest thing I've kind of made notice of is that even though from a cinematic perspective, the microseries is the closest you get to a 2.5, this from a narrative perspective is like almost the closest you get to that, or almost like a 2.9 if you think about it. It's like, the way I would compare this is to Revenge of the Sith what Rogue One was to a New Hope.
Pretty much. So
we got a lot to cover here. So with background out of the way, we're also going to kind of clarify how we're going to cover this. Is since there's just so many bloody chapters, there's over 50, if I'm not mistaken, there is over 56 chapters in this book, which is absurd. It's, it's a good length, but yeah, it's long and it's a lot to cover. So what we're going to be doing instead is we are going to be covering it based on each plot line, and out of the entire novel, Labyrinth of Evil follows about four to five different plot lines that you follow consistently throughout the story. So we're gonna kind of cover each one based on like when they're introduced, and then we'll kind of work it from there.
So
So
okay, so the A plot,
yeah.
which is is the do you want to do A plot Anakin and Obi-Wan, or do you want to do A plot Mason Shakti?
We should probably start with Anakin and Obi-Wan since like the first set of chapters are focused on them.
Yeah.
Particularly with we could probably mainly start out with the Battle of Cato Nomodia first.
Funny thing, this is actually referenced in, well, it's briefly talked about in the movie, but they say, oh yeah, that business on Cato Nomodia.
You owe me one, but not for saving your skin for the 10th time, ninth
time.
That business on Cato Nomodia, that doesn't count. Yeah, and you finally get to see that. So right away, the book really establishes a good tone of how, by this late stage in the war, the Republic is in a desperate struggle to essentially finally start pushing the Separatists out of the core worlds, which pretty much tying into the EU goes really well, where this is kind of after Grievous launched Operation Dirge's Lance, and now the Republic's finally getting a foothold in starting to push the Separatists almost exclusively to the Outer Rim now, and this
is effectively the Outer Rim siege is where we are at this point in the timeline, give or take. And
so beginning with it, Anakin and Obi-Wan are sent to invade Cato Nomodia because Republic intelligence essentially concludes that Gunray, one of the Separatist council members, is on the planet and is essentially attempting to gather all of his remaining possessions before vacating the world permanently.
And over the course of this battle, they don't come across Gunray because Gunray has already buggered off, but they do come across an alternative prize, which is the Mechno chair that was actually seen in episode 1, which is how Gunray was actually able to talk to Darth Sidious. This is significant because this will come up in a later bit.
This pretty much, that Mechno chair pretty much becomes the catalyst to the entire plot of this book. Pretty much. And so, right away, the battle does a great job of really personifying how desperate the struggle of the war has gone. And I also got to say right away, I love how Kenobi and Anakin are just automatically portrayed here, where it's a lot like the micro-series with Volume 2, where there's still that old bit of uneasiness from their Attack of the Clones persona, but it's personified where they're a lot more cooperative with each other, they're more easily able to work together and complement each other's different strengths and weaknesses.
Isn't there a bit, or is that later on where, oh no, I think that's later on, never mind, because I was going to say there's a bit where Obi-Wan, like, there's like a gas trap or something, and Obi-Wan, he comes out of it, and he's acting like he's drunk off his ass, which is
hilarious. Yes, because he gets exposed to a set of spores on the planet that essentially are like, it's effectively making him high. And this is actually noted when Anakin and Obi-Wan split up, because Anakin goes to directly try to capture Gunray, while Obi-Wan is attempting to handle a different matter. And essentially, Obi-Wan ended up losing his respirator, or his the thing that Jedi wear to filter out stuff. It's the one from the Phantom Menace.
Yeah, the rebreather.
And so he loses that, gets high out of his ass, and just cuts down over like 40 to 50 battle droids. And it's funny because Anakin's trying to go after Gunray. Gunray barely escapes onto the shuttle, and Anakin's like, call in a ship, I'm going after him. It's like, General Skywalker, General Kenobi is currently dealing with a situation. It might require help. And he's like, all right, let's go help Obi-Wan. And it's a little moment, but I think it works well with demonstrating Anakin's character, where it's like, even though he's been wanting to capture and or kill Gunray throughout this entire war, because Anakin has personal beef with Gunray. He really does, given that Gunray has tried multiple times to kill Padme. So, Anakin has a lot of personal beef in wanting to capture and or kill him, but even with this, it shows, like, yeah, as much as he wants that, he is willing to prioritize protecting Obi-Wan first.
Yeah, and so, after, like, Anakin's reaction to Obi-Wan being high off his ass is hilarious. It's not the funniest bit in the book, but it is quite
The
hilarious.
council should the council should have seen you. I think you invented a new lightsaber form. And
Yeah.
it's kind of funny. It's funny too because I think about how in a lot of ways it's almost like it's funny how in a way how different drugs or other substances can actually influence a Jedi's like combat performance. You know, like
Well,
it's like
death sticks. There's spice. There's this.
well,
This
yeah, well, some of them like worked to the detriment, but because of how the spores worked, it funny enough actually allowed Obi-Wan to open himself to the flow of the Force a lot easier. So it actually unintentionally kind of helped him a little bit.
and this is Kenobi we're talking about. The human punching bag we're talking about here, and this is the guy who has survived basically being tortured by Ventress on Rat Attack. He had a mask on where he was deprived of sleep. He had that mask on, which was basically dulling his senses, all the while having maggots feasting on his innards. Like, you don't get much more like tanky than that in the Star Wars universe. And as far as that goes, like, holy shit, it's because he's just too fucking stubborn to die.
Yeah, no kidding. That's just how it always goes with Obi-Wan. He's
And even
Obi
and even when he is like knocked out of a fight, he always just goes into. There's actually this one picture I saw a long time ago where he was actually like bandaged up and on life support, and he was just in a I guess he was in a healing trance.
yeah, Obi-Wan is just one of those perfect examples of a quintessential Jedi, and it's kind of almost indicative of how his mindset contrasts so much from Anakin's, because the thing about Anakin is like really driven from just the general desire of really upholding the peace and justice specifically towards the Republic. And because of that, while Obi-Wan kind of treats the war as a very tragic thing that never happened, that never should have happened, I think for Anakin's case, it's kind of reinforced a lot in this book that in a way the war almost kind of was the one place that Anakin really fit in. Because it was like Anakin is that personification where when you think of him as a Jedi Knight, he is a Knight first and a Jedi second.
And considering his training took place like during a time of civil unrest, which led to galactic war, it makes sense that he would have that kind of enforcer soldier mindset. In fact, in the Star Wars role-playing game, I believe there's a section on his character sheet where it says soldier. I could be mistaken here. Just
I
don't.
mean, honestly, if it did, it would actually be pretty accurate towards him. Because that's the thing about the novel that's also pointed out. It's like Anakin's very militant. He's very like trying to because right as soon as Obi-Wan's safe, he's immediately trying to track down Gunray, and pretty much the issue was it's hard for them to do it because Gunray, pretty much in a rare case of him actually being smart, actually deployed a bunch of decoy shuttles for the Republic to try to shoot down so that it enabled him a more clear shot into escaping.
Unfortunately, though, he forgot about the Mechno chair, which leads into
His interactions with Hako, by the way, with that are hilarious. That's one thing I gotta also praise it on is his interactions with Hako are hilarious as fuck. And we'll get to the big one later.
That leads
We'll get to the big one later, but pretty much Gunray and Hako, because Gunray's like, the chair. Where's the chair? Like, what the fuck? Where's the chair? And Hako's like, what do you mean, where's the chair? And he's like, I thought you brought it on. I didn't bring it on. Okay, well, we at least got it, that like, you at least activated the self-destruct sequence.
No.
Hako's like, I don't even know what the code is. He's like, oh, fuck. And
pretty much. And
funny. And it leads to a hilarious thing because their plan of improvising is, can we get the Mechno chair, can we order it to self-destruct from here? And Hako's like, no, but maybe we can get the chair to do it itself by essentially triggering its proximity programming. And so they do that, but what's funny about it is, as Obi-Wan and Anakin are kind of looking around, it actually draws more attention to the Mechno chair than it otherwise would have. Because as soon as Obi-Wan and Anakin notice that, Obi-Wan's like, I recognize that chair. That was the Mechno chair from Naboo, which it is kind of a little corny how Obi-Wan can just automatically remember that from all those years ago, but like
That was almost 10, what, 13 years ago, give or take?
yeah, and he just recognizes it from the back of his hand. Like, yeah, I don't know. That's definitely an element from the book that's a little far-fetched. Like, it probably would have been more sensible if Obi-Wan only recognized it after they went through all the stuff with it, and then went like, wait, I think that might be. Oh, yeah, it is. But I don't know. It's a nitpick, but it's not a big deal. And then, anyways, oh, I forgot to mention, as Anakin and Obi-Wan are dealing with their adventures when trying to capture Gunray, they meet a particular droid, TC-16.
Oh yeah, I remember this one. Yeah, that was the one that was like it was kind of a little bit like 3PO in a way. It would just not.
Yeah.
It would just it would. Oh, you know the best insult you can give somebody. Um, you know what you and a broken protocol droid have in common? Yak yak
What?
yak 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 yak
Yeah,
yak
no
yak.
kidding, no kidding.
I love
But
that.
yeah, essentially TC-14 also, or not 14, sorry, 16, becomes a big part later on too. But yeah, after the Mechno chair is essentially set to self-destruct, Obi-Wan is like, because initially Obi-Wan's like telling Anakin, hey, don't tamper with it, let's just wait for the engineering team to come in and they'll take care of it, the
Oh, this
technician.
this is this is Lethal Weapon 3 all over again. The bomb squad never gets here on time.
Yeah, that's pretty much what Anakin does. He's pretty much like, by the time the technicians get here, half of the data is gonna be like erased. And Obi-Wan's like, Anakin, you're gonna end up breaking it. As soon as the self-destruct, Anakin's like, don't worry, I can deactivate the sequence. He's like, Anakin, you're like gonna die from this thing.
Cut the red wire. Obi-Wan. Yeah. Grab the cat. Grab the cat, and then the whole building like that's literally.
Oh
It's
my
it's a
gosh,
literal.
yeah, bad ending. But
Yeah. It's actually
But
pretty
yeah,
funny.
no, but Anakin being Anakin pulls it off just in time, but as soon as the Mechno Chair self-destruct sequence is disabled, Diaxis gas reveals, and then after that's done, it finally projects the hologram, and the hologram has a direct contact message between Sidious and Gunray. And so it just has something like, can you do this, Viceroy? And he's like, yes, yes, everything is according to your plan, Sidious. And Kenobi's like, wait,
Uh-oh.
Sidious?
And
I will contact Yoda
this
immediately.
starts the B plot. Well, we'll get to Mace later, but then we cut to this is also a great. This book does a really good job with fleshing out Grievous and a little bit of Dooku too. In fact, this book has one of the best quotes about the Makashi mindset that regarding the Jajaric thing, where a a skilled swordsman, a combat master, can be defeated by a canteen brawler who knows nothing about form but everything about ending a fight quickly. And Grievous is like training with his Magna Guards, and Dooku's like, no, 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 you're doing it all wrong. It's like this.
It's a very funny dynamic, yeah, because this cuts into, yeah, the one element the book does very well, which I'll get into more detail in a second, is one element I would say the book does very well is really giving nuanced perspectives on pretty much all of the major sides in the war at this point in time. Because you have Anakin and Obi-Wan and what's going on with them. Then cutting into the B plot, which leads into Mace, which is kind of set up through Yoda. Because pretty much eventually Yoda gets to Caden Nomodia and him and Obi-Wan talk about. Effectively, they kind of recap a lot of the things they know so far and try to kind of piece together the things surrounding the Clone Army and the timing behind Dooku's orchestration of the Clone Wars and how Sidious fits into all of it, which is... It's quite fascinating in a way because it really... There's a line that I really enjoyed with this is, when did the Jedi truly know when the Sith did, at what point could the Sith have returned? Obi-Wan asked, and Yoda says, never truly gone were they, Yoda replied. Something I'm paraphrasing, like, this isn't quote for quote, but it's like, I like that line because it comes from, depending on how you interpret it, which I feel like, because you either can interpret it as either the Jedi are really realizing the error of their thinking, like, oh, the Sith have been extinct for over a millennia, and they're kind of like, yeah, no, we were dead wrong. Or it could insinuate that the Jedi knew, but I think it's much more closer to the former, where Yoda just kind of realized, no, we made a mistake in assuming that.
And this kicks off the B plot, but the best part comes from Grievous, and he finds out about Gunray.
Yeah, but we're getting ahead of ourselves with that, though.
Right.
Yeah, we are. Because there's still a lot of stuff that goes on in between that. Like I said, guys, it's very hard to organize this review, so you have to kind of bear with us on that. But yeah, it sets up the B plot where essentially Yoda is working with Mace and I forget his name. I gotta look it up, but what's the name of the investigator, like technician guy that was working with him?
I forget actually now that I think about it.
I'm so mad at myself.
Didn't they also have a company of clones accompanying them too when they started?
Yeah, they did. So I'm trying to find it in here for a second because if I don't remember his name, I'm gonna be a little upset with myself if I don't recognize the name. But hey, while I'm trying to figure that part out, we should probably talk about the political segments with Bail, Mon Mothma, and Padme.
Okay, so there's a bit.
I found it. Intelligence Officer Dine. So yeah, he assists in there, and that's where they figure out stuff encoded in the Mechno chair that not only tied towards Sidious. So here's what they figure out through the Mechno chair, and this is kind of what sets up all the separate plots with the Jedi, because you have one, they discover who engineered it, which is essentially an insectoid. Again, terrible with names. Basically an insectoid engineer, not Geonosian, no. And they essentially are responsible for the Mechno chair's creation. So Anakin and Obi-Wan are sent to handle that situation. Meanwhile, they also discover the Mechno chair gives away a lot of intelligence related to communications between the Separatist council members. And this cuts into a really big conflict later on, where pretty much they learn through the Mechno chair intelligence, because Gunray eventually makes it towards the Separatist fleet. Grievous is mad that he's late. They don't know about the Mechno chair yet. But Grievous is like, alright, Gunray's late. I'm going to punish him by making the Republic fighters chasing him scare the living hell out of him. and then, it's kind of funny because it says it's a sadistic part about Grievous, but it also represents his pragmatic nature, because he also wants to test the ARC 170's capabilities, because by this point in the book, they're relegated as, new. So
the ARC 170 is essentially either the F-16, the F-14, or the F-18 of the Star Wars. Actually, I would say it's the F-16. Actually, now I think about it, because I don't know. Because would you say the X-wing would be the F-18 then?
Probably. I mean, the ARC 170 is pretty much a precursor towards the X-wing to it, but yeah, they essentially Grievous is testing their capabilities, and another element I like in relation to the novel is right away it really, once again, much like the microseries, it establishes Grievous as a very competent threat, but also really puts into his 3D character elements, especially with his code of honor. Because the thing that he kind of notes is that in any other circumstance, he'd actually, the clone pilots were performing so well in the ARC 170s and performing so, being so, essentially great pilots and warriors with it, that Grievous even acknowledges in his internal thoughts that if it wasn't for the need to keep the Separatist fleet location secret, he'd actually probably let them get away to fight another day.
And it's funny how...
But since he can't compromise the location, he has to kill all of them.
Yeah, it's funny that he actually lets the pilots get that close to shooting down Gunray's shuttle. And even doesn't Gunray also have a thing where he's like, why did you let them shoot at me? They could have killed me, and that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, Gunray confronts... We're Grievous, because when Gunray gets on board the Dreadnought, which I think by this point it was the Invisible Hand, Grievous essentially greets him. He's like, "Ah, welcome aboard, Viceroy. At long last, the Separatist Council is all accounted for." And Gunray's trying to keep the formality because both Hako and Gunray are like, they're like, Grievous did this on purpose. And Gunray's like, I know, it's punishment for our late arrival. And he's like, Hako's like, he nearly got us killed. We gotta tell Dooku about this. And he's like, it's like, I think Dooku would end up siding with Grievous on this. Like, it really shows, Gunray in a way is like, he is simultaneously arrogant over Grievous, but also terrified of him. Because they even mention it in the Mechno Chair incident where they're trying to figure out what to do with that. They're like, what if he finds out? And he's like, who? Sidious? Not Sidious.
Grievous.
You mean Count Dooku? Are you brain dead? I mean Grievous. What if Grievous finds out?
That's the second time they've mentioned the whole "Are you brain dead" thing. It's like, it's weird. It's, if I had a nickel for every time that's happened, I've had 2 nickels, which is weird. That's only happened twice.
It's not a lot, but it's strange it happened twice. Yeah,
it's so strange, and I'm like, that might be like a Nemoidian insult where they ask, "Are you brain dead?" And my favorite edit is, "I don't know," and it's brilliant.
Are you brain dead? I don't know.
I love it.
It's great,
and it leads,
but like.
Ultimately,
yeah, Grievous gathers the meeting, and Gunray's kind of a little bit confrontational with Grievous because he's like, because Gunray's like, oh, like, you know, I would hope that I'd be valued to make it safe, and Grievous is like, of course, you're a fellow council member. It's my job to protect all of you and make sure that you're nice and safe.
I love the fact that he's like, I'm gonna fucking murder you later.
Oh yeah, no, it's Grievous being that is like the closest Grievous can get to actually putting on a superficial politeness. Because Grievous is literally just going like, oh no, I wasn't trying to get you killed. I'm your guardian, your protector, Viceroy. Meanwhile, he's probably thinking in the back of his head, God damn it, I wish I could just strangle you.
Ultimately, it leads to one of the funniest moments in the book by and far. Or does that come later?
We're not there yet. But Grievous essentially, but from this moment, Grievous realized the orders from Sidious and Dooku, which is essentially like, what they mention is, okay, most of their home planets have been pushed out by this point. So, because we already know Munilis got invaded already, thanks to the Volume 1 of the microseries.
Yep.
Keto Nemodia has just fallen. I'm not sure about Skenko Minor in this series. I'm not sure.
The Megiddo campaign takes place here, around this time.
Yeah, something like that. But yeah, most of their worlds are pushed out in the core. And so Grievous is like saying, okay, Sidious and Dooku are ordering you all to stay together now, because, that's going to make it easier for me to do my job and keep you safe. And in the meantime, I am going to find a new world for you to settle on. And it's funny because Sandhill's like, what world is going to accept us now? And Grievous is like, if no world volunteers, I will simply conquer one.
Yeah. And that's how they end up on Utapau, I believe.
Eventually, yeah, they settle for Utapau, but that's not Grievous's first target, because that's when they get into Mace, the chief investigator, like the intelligence officer Dine, and Yoda eventually break into the Mechnochair code, because Grievous is also like, once when I find a world, I'll contact you all through the Mechnochairs and through the usual frequencies. And this is a point where, like, by all accounts, Gunray should have said what happened, but he hasn't, because he's still trying to cover his ass. And so essentially Grievous they intercept the transmission from Grievous that says, yes, we finally located a new place. We are going to settle and invade Belderoom. And this leads to an interesting dynamic with Yoda and Mace, which I like, is Yoda and Mace and the intelligence officer discuss the idea of, okay, we know Grievous is about to attack Belderoom, but should we act on this info? Because if we act on it, then they're going to know that we know. They're going to know that we're aware of the Mechnochair. However, if we don't do it, then Grievous is gonna kill thousands, if not millions of lives. So...
And ultimately they do act on it, correct? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, they do.
And
But
it leads to an interesting interaction where, like, the Separatist fleet is coming in, and then
the Republic fleet's already just right there, and he's like, "Wait, what?
What the hell?"
Like,
it's literally
we're not supposed to know we're here, and
it's literally the Rishi episode where it's like, the Republic fleet, we're outgunned, get us out of here, basically.
well, it's actually one of the few times which this is kind of an element of Grievous I want to highlight strategically, because here's from a military officer perspective is the thing about Grievous in this book is because a lot of people complain about the idea of, oh, Grievous is OP in the EU or the Clone Wars microseries. And I think what's interesting about this is, like, it's not even, like, the thing about Star Wars The Clone Wars with treating Grievous out of character in TCW, it's not even necessarily that Grievous would retreat from a battle if things turn against him, because that is part of Grievous's pragmatic nature. Like, that's kind of the internal battle Grievous always has between his... what remains of his honor as a Kaleesh warrior, but also the cold pragmatism that he has because of his reconstruction and everything else. And so, it's not necessarily that it's out of character for Grievous to cut his losses when he genuinely is on the back foot and losing. The issue that TCW gets wrong is Grievous, in comparison to the EU, is in the EU, Grievous rarely loses.
I think
he rarely loses because he always takes a lot of effort to essentially outmaneuver his opponents and keep them guessing to prevent them from being able to predict his tactics, and he doesn't leave any breathing room for them. And he's not so arrogant as to just gloat when the battle isn't really certain.
Yeah, and a thing that we covered in the micro series for Volume 2, the quote, if any one element is lacking, it would be best for you to retreat. I think the writers of TCW took that quote a little too literally, and we've said this
no kidding.
They literally take that to heart. Like, yeah, of course. Like, if you don't have fear, surprise, and intimidation on your side, yeah, you should
cut your losses. Cut your losses. Don't do a suicidal last stand. Just get out. But the problem is that the problem with TCW isn't necessarily that Grievous's retreat or an issue. It's just TCW, by comparison with Labyrinth and so much of the other EU books and comics, is Grievous in the EU is actually treated as cold, calculating, and intelligent, almost to a fault. Like, the thing about Grievous is he is so calculating in his approach that he doesn't really... The issue with him is, because he's lost so much of that empathetic, organic side to him, he's kind of so hyper-focused on dealing with the Republic and beating it militarily that he's not really realizing that he's getting played. He doesn't really realize that.
I don't like making this comparison, but I sometimes compare Grievous a little bit to RoboCop. Just a little bit.
Grievous is pretty much a RoboCop if RoboCop was a psychotic,
That, ladies and gentlemen, is the only time you'll hear me compare RoboCop to General Grievous. And
you could actually say he is, though. Like, that's kind of the funny thing. Like, Grievous is a lot like a RoboCop in the sense of he was once an honorable warrior, kind of in the way how Alex Murphy was once a police officer, though in Grievous's case, more of a tribalistic warlord, and both suffer a severe accident that was orchestrated by a corporate power beyond them, and both are effectively having the battle between the organic side versus the way their mind has been altered because of the programming. Now, yes, Grievous is not as explicitly programming, but it is clear during his reconstruction that his brain was altered to essentially make it where certain elements like his empathy were extremely suppressed, while his aggression levels, general disdains, went a lot higher. And this made it where it was a lot easier for the Sith to kind of control him and point him in whatever direction they wanted.
Yeah. And this finally leads, so when
so Grievous retreats, and this leads to a very, very interesting confrontation with Gunray, which is So like Grievous is like knocking on the door, and literally he's pissed. He's pissed beyond belief. So pissed that even like when the gunnery guards of Gunray, the Nemodian gunneries, like try to kind of block their path, Grievous just like knocks them out of the way and like orders the Magna Guards to like just move them. Like screw, like I will electrocute you if I have to. I don't give a shit. And he's like banging on the door like, Viceroy, I know you fucked up. Get out of here.
Viceroy,
Haku's
your pizza's
Haku's
here.
like literally starting to try to run off, and Gunray's like, Haku, where are you going? Running is only gonna make us look guilty.
We are guilty.
It's so good. You have no idea how many podcasts have happened with Deadponic waiting for this moment. You have no idea.
I'm sorry. That's...
And yeah, so it's interesting though because Gunray eventually does, like when Grievous does get in, Gunray in a very shocking turn of events actually tries to man-stand Grievous, which is kind of rare for him. Where Gunray tries to say like, no, you're the incompetent one. You were that was find us a world. You failed. You're an abomination. Screw you. And it's funny to me in a way, because you wouldn't think Gunray would be the type of person to necessarily do that, just because the movies, for the most part, depict him as very cowardly. But, funny enough, a lot of people would attribute it as out of character, but it actually does make sense to a degree. Because the way I see it is, Gunray isn't afraid of things that are tangible. And that's kind of the thing. It's like if Gunray can see it, touch it, and understand it, he's not necessarily afraid of that. So, like, for example, one thing you could easily imagine, especially during the events surrounding, like, Cloak of Deception, if some corrupt senator wanted to blackmail Gunray into something, Gunray would just pull a fucking Homelander. He'd be like, go ahead, expose me. Sure, I might lose everything, but then I won't have anything left to lose. Do it, you fucker. You won't. No balls. It's like, if I go down, I'm taking you with me. But it's funny because that is such a contrast to sort of his fear dynamic with the Sith, by contrast. Because one element that's covered in Chapter 8, it gives a little bit of Gunray's perspective. And here, I'm going to pull up Chapter 8 now. I really do like this chapter.
There is a quote from Dooku that will be carried forward when we get to Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, which we'll get to that when we talk about Dooku and his dynamic with Sidious.
Well, he describes Gunray, and he says, poor Gunray.
Poor Gunray, pitiful creature.
Which plays, it does, that kind of leads into something in Revenge of the Sith. We'll get to that when we get to that, because we don't want to ruin it.
It's a strange predicament, but yeah, we'll get into that in just a few. But here's something I like, because this really does represent a world-building aspect with the Separatists that I think is really well done. So, sorry about that. Let me find it here.
Thankfully, we actually have access to the book, so we can actually quote the book.
Gunray said nothing, although he had been asking himself the same question for the past several weeks. One thing was clear. The glory days of the Trade Federation had come to an untimely end. Ironically, the individual most responsible for that bright burning, for the rise of Newt Gunray himself, was the same individual who had repeatedly betrayed him, and to whom Gunray and the other Separatists were now forced to look for salvation, the Sith Lord Darth Sidious. There at Dervola and Aridiu, manipulating events to shunt power and influence to the Nemodians. There at Naboo, ordering a blockade of the planet, the murder of Jedi, assassination of the Queen, a debacle for the Trade Federation. Years of attempts by the Republic to try to convict Gunray and his chief officers, to break the hold the Trade Federation enjoyed on galactic shipping. But not once during that time of public disgrace did Gunray mention the role Sidious had played. Out of fear, certainly, but also because he had sensed that Sidious had not abandoned him completely. Rather, the Dark Lord was somehow seeing to it that the trials never came to fruition, that no lasting verdicts were rendered or punishments handed down, as the separatist movement gained strength, threatening the security of ships and shipments in far sectors. The Trade Federation had actually been able to increase the size of its standing army of battle droids by dealing directly with the Foundry worlds such as Geonosis and Hypori, making the most of the Republic's sudden instability. Lucrative deals had been arranged between the Trade Federation and the Corporate Alliance, the Intergalactic Banking Clan, the Techno Union, the Commerce Guild, and the other corporate entities. It was during the final trial that Gunray had been approached by Count Dooku, who had promised that all would ultimately turn out well for the Trade Federation. In a moment of weakness, Gunray had revealed the truth about his dealings with Darth Sidious. Dooku has listened intently, had promised to bring the matter to the attention of the Jedi Council, though he himself had left the Order some years earlier. Gunray had mixed feelings about Dooku's purpose in creating a separatist movement, chiefly because corruption in the Republic Senate had so often worked to the Trade Federation's advantage. But if Dooku's Confederacy of Independent Systems could eliminate even some of the bribes and kickback commonplace in galactic trade, then so much the better. By and by, Dooku's real aims had been made clear. He was less interested in providing an alternative to the Republic than he was in bringing the Republic to its knees, through the use of force if necessary. In a messed up way, the Trade Federation had amassed an army right under Supreme Chancellor Finis Valorum. Dooku, in plain sight, was seeing to it that Factoid Armor Workshops was supplying the weapons to any corporations that agreed to ally with him. Regardless, Gunray had resisted offers to throw his full support to the Separatists, not when there were still profits to be made in countless Republic star systems. Playing a game of his own, teasing Dooku along, he had informed Dooku that a precondition to their entering into any exclusive arrangement was the death of former Naboo Queen Padme Amidala, who had foiled Gunray on 2 occasions, and had been the loudest opposition voice at his trial. I'm going to kind of leave it at that, but there's 2 really interesting points about this that I think are worth covering. The first is, I think it's interesting how what Gunray provides, at least through his own perspective, is that he, alongside some of the other corporate entities, were actually, in a way, very almost reluctant to back the separatist movement, just out of the principle of they were already benefiting so much from the corrupt Senate that was going on, and almost saw it as counterintuitive to their goals to work to conspire to dismantle it.
Yeah, and I believe there was something about Gunray was like shocked to learn that Dooku was a Sith or something.
Yeah, well, that's a funny thing too, because it's like Sidious actively fucked him over, and then Dooku consoled with him, and Dooku's like, "Oh, hey, it's come with me. I'll help you out."
By the way,
and then it's funny. Yeah, and it's funny because that's how he is. Like, Sidious pretty much worked with these mega corporations, screwed over like some of them. And then Dooku's like, "Oh, here, I'll come and help you." And then years down the line, it's like Dooku's like, "Oh yeah, remember that Sith Lord that screwed you over? That's my master. I'm also a Sith Lord."
He's like, "Wait, what?"
You can just imagine they're just sitting there like, "What the fuck? What the fuck?" And I think there's another point in Chapter 8 that's kind of brought up that I find really interesting. Damn it, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find the correct pages. I think there's an interesting bit I have, is that they also make mention of how, but if Dooku's Confederacy of Independent Systems could eliminate even some of the bribes and kickbacks commonplace in galactic trade, then so much the better. And they later discover, like, Dooku's aims was less in providing an alternative to the Republic and more of just actively conspiring to destroy it. And it kind of brings up an interesting question that is kind of worthwhile. In a hypothetical, so here's kind of almost an interesting question I would ask, is in the event of the separatist movement actually operating what it claimed it was aiming for, like essentially just trying to build itself as an alternative to the Republic. So like pretend for a second that Dooku isn't a conspiring Sith Lord. if the Separatists were actually legit trying to just build itself as an alternate republic and have these seceded worlds consolidate around it, could you see yourself hypothetically supporting that, or would you still kind of be more of the lines of a republic loyalist? How do you kind of see that if they were genuinely trying to build themselves up as an alternate to the republic, as an alternate government in the Outer Rim that tried to suit their interests more? How would you genuinely feel about that?
Well, the thing I actually really like about that, the whole idea behind the Separatists as a whole, is that they are actively like this does feel very similar to like real world politics in a way, because there are certain factions within certain political parties that are really actually still trying to uphold certain things regarding like what the original party was supposed to, like whole strive for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I believe if the Separatist movement hadn't been intercepted and hadn't been created by the Sith as basically one big giant false flag and one big giant decoy operation, they could have gotten legitimacy of some kind. They could have at least been brought to the table and said, hey, maybe we could work something out. And, and the whole thing is that they do believe that the Republic is corrupt to the point where they basically is like, there's no point in trying to save it because it's too corrupt. So why not?
Well, it's too corrupt. It's too inefficient. Its taxation is ridiculous.
And also, something about the Jedi too, where they're basically the Jedi serve. Well, that's a big thing about Dooku.
The Jedi have become lapdogs to the Senate.
Yeah,
and it's also a point of the Republic also has, in a lot of ways, operated as a bad arbiter within mediating conflicts by this point, because like, if you think of like the incident with Kalish within their war with the Yamari, as well as the Mandalorian civil wars, both of those were cases where the Republic intervened to resolve the conflict, but it didn't resolve it in a way that was actually like, it pretty much like made the situation for victims of those conflicts even worse than they already were.
Since Grievous is a main focus here, let's quickly talk about his background, because this is an interesting thing.
Yes, absolutely. I think, I would firmly agree with that, especially since it does tie with the... So okay. This is actually like the first major storyline that actually really gets into Grievous's backstory. Because up until this point, all we really knew about Grievous was Cyborg Killbot. That's really all we knew.
Pretty much a Terminator ripoff a little bit here, too.
Terminator with lightsabers. But this is actually kind of the first material book that actually gets into his backstory, because there is a dedicated chapter. Don't even ask me which one. I don't remember.
So, actually, can I do this one? Because I know a little bit more.
Yeah, please, by all means.
So, basically, Grievous was a Kalish warrior, right? And his people were at war with an insectoid race called the Huck, which are, as he calls them...
the Yamri. That nicknames for each other.
Yeah. So, the reason why he took the name Grievous was because he actually had a partner who he lost during a campaign in the war. So, and as a result, he took the name Grievous because he believed he was destined to grieve endlessly. And then things happened where the Huck essentially went to the Senate and said, hey, the Kalish are the instigators. They've been wiping out our people. They've been, massacring us. And Grievous has a funny thing where he calls them nothing but murderous bugs, which, I
mean, they pretty much are. I think they address that, like, Grievous, even at a young age, really despised them, because Grievous pretty much had to deal with the Yamari invasion pretty much his entire life.
Yeah,
from what I can recall, his father died at the hands of them. And what I recall is if I'm remembering the information correctly, I think it's established that Grievous killed his very first Huck at just like 6 years old.
I don't know for sure. I would have to double check that, but
yeah, I'm going off memory, but pretty much Grievous has been struggling in this fight since a young age. So you could kind of imagine that since the Republic stepped in at the side of the Huck.
Speaking of the Republic, so the Republic sent in a Jedi strike force. Basically, the Huck appealed to the Senate, and the Senate commissioned a Jedi strike force to put down Grievous's forces, and ultimately Grievous was forced to basically become a dead
Well, they
collector.
also put Kali under like really heavy sanctions,
Yeah, it
which
was
pretty much
which
made the
affected
planet go
people.
through a massive famine that was killing like thousands of their people. And so what happens by this point is Grievous essentially gets approached by Sandhill of the Intergalactic Banking Clan, and Sandhill essentially offers, look, um, if you agree to be an IGBC enforcer, essentially a debt collector, pretty much.
Oh,
Uh,
funny thing about that.
yeah, funny honorable mention.
The Hellfire tank, the one with the wheels and the big rocket launchers,
Fires the
apparently,
tracking missiles.
yeah, that is a debt collecting droid. I'm like,
It's
what?
literally there for the IGBC to go up to someone that's in debt with them. And it's like, hey, we're here to collect your debt. Well, I don't have the money. Hey, that's a nice home you got there. It'd be a shame if
Something bad
something
happened to it.
blew it up.
It's like, what the hell, guys? Like, that is one detail I can't help but laugh at. Anyway, so Grievous is
So yeah,
forced.
Grievous becomes an IGBC enforcer debt collector. Pretty much, if I were to equate him, he effectively became Arthur Morgan for the banking clan, pretty much.
I've never played Red Dead Redemption 2, so I don't know that whole saga.
Yeah.
Anyway,
But Grievous does that for a time, but then he ends up discovering that the Huck are kind of attacking the Kaleesh again. This time they are desecrating their like holy temples and all that.
and that
And
starts up the whole war again. And so as Grievous is
Grievous
actually,
abandons his post from the Intergalactic Banking Clan, and Sandhill doesn't like that very
and
much.
it turns out, so he gets into his shuttle, and then, well, basically his shuttle blows up, and then a mysterious figure in a cloak shocks him and basically puts him, like, defibrillates him and puts him into stasis. This is revealed later on to be actually Count Dooku, and this is how Grievous was actually, he was actually brought to, I believe, Geonosis. Correct me if I'm wrong here?
I think so, yeah. I think he's brought to Geonosis, and then essentially he's approached again by Sandhill, where he's like, hey, and effectively, because the shuttle sabotage was orchestrated by Dooku, Sandhill, and Poggle. However, they framed the Jedi for it. So Sandhill's like, hey, the Jedi blew up your ship with you on it. We managed to just barely, save you. However, your body's pretty much damaged beyond repair, so you're going to die in a few hours unless we do a cybernetic reconstruction. And so what they essentially tell Grievous is, look, we'll save your life, we'll rebuild your body, and in exchange, you'll become essentially the supreme commander of our new movement of essentially a faction that's going to be really soon be going to the war against the Republic.
And Grievous like, oh, absolutely. And he kind of had a really negative thought, like, opinion of the droid army as a whole because they were ineffective. But the thing is, contrary to popular belief, Grievous did not achieve his first Jedi kill on Hypori. It was actually on Geonosis. During the arena massacre, he was sitting in the background watching as the Jedi were constantly gunned down, and then he was making his way to his ship. A fact that is actually brought up in Republic Commando because he's making his way through the Geonosian catacombs, he actually encounters his first Jedi and manages to kill her. I forget who the name of the Jedi is, but that's how he gets his first lightsaber. Well, he gets his first like trophy lightsaber, and then he gets onto a ship and flies away. And this is actually seen in Republic Commando, which we will be
Well,
covering.
Republic Commando, like when you're playing as Delta Squad, you encounter a couple of dead Jedi bodies, but you notice the Jedi bodies are killed by lightsaber marks, so you're like, wait, what? Like, it's a very big demonstration to indicate, like, kind of an early tease of Grievous,
Yeah, and
which works really well in the game. But, yeah, circling back to the novel, though, I think, yeah, Grievous is really given a lot of depth here to the point where I would kind of say, outside of, like, Anakin and Obi-Wan, he's kind of given the most characterization to work with. Like, it's kind of crazy there. But, yeah, circling back to the original question, I guess the way I would say it, because you did say how a possible coexistence could be forged. Do you think that's something you would actively support if you were someone in the Star Wars setting? Like,
I
if
would
like,
if I was like
Assassin's
I
Movement
would
did form like that?
I would 100%. Like, I would try to do the whole heroes on both sides thing where I would actually, like, even though I know that's not a very good idea. Like,
Well,
the
even though it's not going to fit reality with the Sith plan, it's just, yeah, yeah, pretty much. Which,
Taking the Sith out of the equation for a second, if the Sith hadn't intercepted and created this whole thing, and if the Separatist movement had been allowed to progress, it would have taken longer to actually get to the boiling point, but it would have still happened. However, the funny thing is, without the Separatist movement, there would be no Sith ascending to power, and there would be no Galactic Empire. And with no Galactic Empire, well, also because the Geonosians helped contribute to the designs of the Death Star, there would be no Death Star. So
a lot of fun alternate stuff to think about. And yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in agreement with you. Like, I'm going to be blunt in regards with my audience, which it kind of should be made obvious given a lot of videos I've made in analysis, like my Star Wars analysis videos. I am generally speaking, a hardcore Separatist sympathizer. And I think it generally comes from the fact that I think about if it wasn't for the bad, if it wasn't for just generally the bad intercepting factors that were at play, I think genuinely the Outer Rim breaking off and trying to form a government that was more aligned with their interests would have been better, because by the time we get to the prequel trilogy timeframe, the Republic is just, one, it's extremely old and is pretty much stagnated into a point where nothing has really progressed or changed at all. B, the Senate has grown corrupt to the point where pretty much they're more concerned with just lining up their pockets and staying in office rather than actually affecting any substantial things.
Funny thing here, this is actually mentioned in Attack of the Clones. Palpatine is a politician. I've observed that he is very good at following the passions and prejudices of the Senate.
Which is precisely a good point that is made that, could have been explored more, which thankfully this book does explore more. Is effectively it, like, because the thing I think about, especially between what happened on Kali, Rat Attack, Jabim, New Plemto, and just a lot of other worlds that
even worlds like Tatooine, like where Hutt control is massive. Like the Hutts rule basically, and also the Hutt cartel rule a vast section of the Outer Rim because that's kind of their territory.
Yeah.
The problem is...
So from that perspective, I'd actually be genuinely, like, in that kind of support, like, kind of similar to what kind of Mina Bonteri was like, with wanting to do that. In fact, one of the few praises I can actually give TCW as a whole in relation to what it adds to the lore is I do like how it does go out of its way to establish a civilian government within the CIA. I do think that was
that's the one thing that really bugged me was that when I was younger, I always believed the Separatist Council was the one that controlled everything. Like, you had the economics, you had the military, and you had the political side of things, and you had the technology side of things. But that didn't really make sense to me. And then, well, TCW...
Well, it just makes you go, why would thousands of systems line up with that if that's all it's composed of? Like, to me, so that's actually one of the few additions in TCW that's actually done really well that I say would actually do well to stay in the EU, even if TCW itself didn't, would be that. But I think it's a case of... I think a big key point in relation, though, is that the Separatist Council is... Even though they aren't the only comprisal with the CIS, because you still have all these like regional planets that want to break off and all that, it is clear that because of the way the Sith organized it, it's kind of like the power dynamic shifted away from the seceded and regional systems over to these mega corporations, because effectively the Sith's just like, hey, we want you to build massive droid armies for us and use them to go to war. Like, and it's kind of funny in that sense because, like, one element that's sort of interesting to me is the fact that it kind of highlights almost why the war, in a way, was kind of an inevitable boiling point, because the way I see it is, in theory, while a coexistence between the Republic and whatever Separatist government would have formed could have been possible in theory, the problem is, because of the way the Sith orchestrated it with the formation of the droid army, the Republic's now put in a position where it feels directly threatened. Because it's like, oh, fuck, they have this massive droid army that they can use to just blackmail us into doing whatever the fuck they want.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny how things from Attack of the Clones are made apparent here. When their battle droids combine with yours, we shall have an army greater than any in the galaxy. The Jedi will be overwhelmed. The Republic will agree to any demands we make. It's like say what you will about Attack of the Clones, but this novel pretty much puts a lot of Attack of the Clones in. It brings it to the forefront and a lot of the political stuff.